Yachi. And so, and it's kind of interesting, you have these societies all over the world, and so he has engaged with them not only in Beijing, but in Los Angeles, New York, and London. And also, Jim has actually participated in various concerts in Beijing in 2002, and also at Willamette University in 2010. And so, anyways, so we're really very happy to have Jim here to introduce us to the instrument and also to the music. And I said there was 3 blessings. The other thing is, when I met Jim had injured his arm and his fingers. So he had told me, he says, I don't think I can play. And I said, but we want you to. And anyways, I said, take care of yourself. And so it's his fingers are not fully healed, but they're partially healed. So he is going to be playing a piece for us, a short piece. And so I really think that's a very special blessing that we have for today. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Binkley, and let's just start off by giving him a hand.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm also going to play a longer piece, one piece, courtesy of the computer. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is you'll be able to hear it. I'll give this a shot at the end, and you may not be able to hear it, even though I can tell you this is perhaps one of the loudest specimens of Guqin on the planet for several reasons. It's basically a chamber instrument, and the ideal setting is one listener sitting about 2 feet away. So, this is a joke. I mean, if you looked at the website, perhaps you thought that Tony Lung was going to come and give me a chin down. He's not. I sent him email, but he never returned. Dennis already did this, but in Chinese and classical Chinese, or in non-Slavic language, this is the chin. Okay, that's just our pronunciation, and that's the character. In modern Chinese, it's the Guqin, so it graduated to be ancient Qin. Ironically, we gave up trying to translate Qin. It was just a bad idea. It's this. Okay, I'll come back to that in a moment. That's an important thing. A very famous person, Robert Van Gulik, decided to call it a lute. And a lot of people sneer at him because a lute is, an instrument that's held like this in your arms. It's what? Horizontal. It is horizontal. The Chinese version of it is called a teapot. It's held like this. And we thought that people nowadays think lute is a bad idea. It is kind of a harp. That would sound better. I've seen a poet who called it a banjo, and I think that was terrible. The other thing I might just, it's okay, never mind. So I'm liable to call it either of those things. This is actually my beginning slide. So Dennis mentioned that this instrument belonged to a scholar class in China. And this is very true. Robert Van Gulik, who I already mentioned, in one of his detective novels set in the Tang Dynasty, although there's a reason this picture is wrong, okay, if it was Tang. He shows his magistrate, Judge D, playing flowing water, okay? That's kind of actually important. We could assume this is a sort of meme where we have a scholar in his library. And you see this sometimes in paintings. I'll show you one that's kind of interesting in a moment. I'm going to show you some paintings, show you some poems, and my real goal is to give you some idea of how the chin is in there where the scholars were concerned. It was one more art, and they actually worked it into painting. They wrote it into poems. Sometimes there's even a poem about it. Okay, and an important thing is that it's not this. This is probably not so important to you, but it's important to me. We chin players get offended when someone claims that's a chin. Okay, it's not. What is it?
It's a
Well,
Japanese koto.
that's right, if this was Japan. But,
Uten?
yes, Gujan.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Gujan is the cousin, but there's, I'm going to actually use this as a foil to talk a little bit about how this is constructed. Okay. But if we look at this instrument, the basic idea is it has a bridge per string. Okay. If you want more notes, you add more strings and bridges. The size of this has varied actually just in the last 100 years. And there was a possible ancestor called the sub in classical times. The sub actually might have had about this number of strings, or might have had twice as many, which I can assure you is too many. So the jung is in some sense a modern zither cousin. But exactly when they cross lines back in time is not clear. Probably, maybe 500 BC, maybe before that. So the difference then is, the other thing I should point out, this is important. This gujang is, I'm always uncomfortable with saying it's a folk instrument, but people take it that way. And it's a relatively cheap instrument. It doesn't mean, and compared to this one is relatively expensive. So naturally, which one is the scholar class going to gravitate towards? Okay, not this one, all right. And an important architectural aspect of this instrument is actually, there's two. One is if I was playing this, you guys in the back row could hear it. All right, but maybe not so with this, as we'll find out later. You notice that the bridges are movable. So fine tuning on the gujang, and sometimes gross tuning to change modes, is done by moving the bridges back and forth. A gujang player is always fiddling with those bridges because they think something's out of tune. All right. There's actually gross tuners these days. In the end, it's a box, in case you didn't know that, and it opens. It's sort of like a little piano. This thing, on the other hand, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, but as far as we know, it came to this form, say, between 200 AD and 500 AD. We think there was a whole lot of experimentation in the Han Dynasty, and it eventually evolved into this. The notable features are 7 strings, used to be silk, now they're not. They're actually harp strings, historically. It has 1 bridge. It's not movable, right? Okay. The reason for that is I have to do something. Basically, you can press the strings to the surface and get different kinds of notes, and you can get very typical sounds, like that with a vibrato, or you see what I mean? Okay, all different variations on one note. Now, these mother-of-pearl markers are called hui. They seem to have appeared sometime between 200 and 500 AD, maybe earlier, we don't know. We found archaeological specimens from old graves, typical in, like around Changsha in China, that don't have them. So obviously this was, if those are proto-chins, at some point these got added, they mark the harmonic notes. So there's a lot of harmonics in Guqian music. It's called Fanyan in Mandarin. It just simply means floating notes. It's a good poetic name for harmonics. Okay. Those are just, you just touch your string lightly, don't press it down, and then you get the harmonic. Guitars have them, pianos have them. This thing has them in spades, because as you can see, there's 13 of those. They're called hui. 7 strings, This guy is basically 2 octaves below middle C. Has a big range, because actually every one of these strings, if you press the note down, has a 2 octave range. So we don't need more strings to get more notes. This guy needs more strings to get more notes. And of course it has removable bridges, and many of them. So I'm sure every once in a while a gujang player loses a bridge and utters some bad words. Basically can't happen here unless it was glued in badly. Okay? And I have a chin that did that, so that's interesting. Now, it's made out of, well, so my point was that there's actually 3 kinds of sounds with the chin. There's pressed notes, there's the harmonics, and there are open strings. And there's actually something like 70 different fingering moves on the left hand and 40 different fingering moves on the right hand. And so there are actually thousands of combinations of touches. And in order to actually learn about that, you have to be a pretty darn good listener and practice, and you need to sit about right there. Okay. It has 2 boards. The top board is a sound board, the bottom board is a reflector. And they're covered with lacquer, which is a painstaking and annoying process. The lacquer from the lacquer tree, same as any other lacquer object that you would find from China or Japan. And actually, usually somebody, well not usually, but sometimes somebody will carve the name of the maker. This chin was made by Zheng Chengwei, who's a Sichuan chin maker and chin master. All right. This thing is a modern idea. Traditionally, you take 4 strings and wrap them around this leg, and 3 strings and wrap them around this leg. Okay? And then there's a friction system here that's at least 1,800 years old for doing fine tuning. So, in gujang, so I should say something about cost. Because China is getting rich, these things have become in vogue. Okay, to at least hang it on your wall, which is what a traditional scholar might have done. A traditional scholar was expected to have one as a symbol. Okay. So these things are basically, you can buy them on eBay for $300, but don't expect quality. All right. Somewhere between $300 and $1 million if it's a Tang Dynasty chin for sale. Okay. And there actually are, because it's a lacquer object, there are about a dozen or so guqin that are 1,300 years old. And you basically, I mean, YouTube has a video of an accomplished chin player playing one. All right, so that's interesting. These guys, not so much. Their life, well, but it helps with their chin. Okay, so you now know something that a lot of people don't know, which is what? This is not a chin. And the scholar class or representatives of it are insulted if you think it is. But you sometimes see comical mistakes. There was a famous TV series made in China about the romance of the 3 kingdoms. And the music that my computer is about to play for you is being played. You could hear it. And you could see Cao Cao's head going back and forth as he's playing his instrument. And then it pulled back into one of those. And I just, they had the music right, they had the instrument wrong. Any questions so far? Sir?
What exactly is the name of that instrument
It's
again?
called the gujang. It's Z-E-N-G.
Thank you.
All right. Now I'm going to show you one of the great scholar wannabes in history. Does anybody know who this is? He's famous for marking up Chinese paintings. Yeah, it's the Qianlong Emperor. You know, about the time of George Washington or slightly before. And this is a painting by Giuseppe Castiglione, who is a famous Jesuit painter who was in the Qing court. And typically painting horses, he's famous for his horse paintings. But here we have Qianlong, basically with his chin. He's got a couple of, you know, this is probably small for his retinue, normally, you know, a couple of servants. And he seems to be playing the chin. And there's a number of ways you can tell it's a chin. One thing, you've got a table. This is a chin table. This is probably a sound box, okay, which is very typical. I have several of those. And it's very easy to tell this is a chin. Why?
Doesn't have the bridges.
Right, you don't see the bridges. What else?
You can see the way.
You can see the play. You can't count the strings. All right.
Hangs over.
Right, and Castiglione, being a Italian trained painter, gave this Western perspective. But what do you expect? But it's kind of cool.
And the listeners are too viewing.
And the listeners are out of the picture. But I'm sure they really liked whatever he played. And by the way, that picture is a meme. You've seen two of them now. Okay, the scholar at the chin table, put in his library. That'll come back. So, what's the chin? Well, it's a 7-string zither with a 3,000 year history. Really? Sort of. We don't know what the heck was going on in the first 1,000 years. It's mentioned. I'll get back to that later. But we do know that about, during the time of Ji Kong, a famous chin player, one of the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove, it seems to have had this shape. Okay. It was the traditional instrument of the scholar class in China. For them, it's a symbol. And it actually has cosmological overtones and various other things. It has a Taoist point of view, it has a Confucian point of view. Those points of view are very old, actually. It has a wealth of music. It has a ridiculous wealth of music, because one of the things the scholar class liked to do was to sort of write, sometimes this person was a wannabe scholar in that they actually were a professional musician with a bunch of students. But they'd write a chin handbook, which is they would use the tablature notation for the chin. They'd write songs down, okay? And they would also write essays. And they would publish this book. And there's a zillion of them. The first one is from 1425 that survived. There's some separate pieces of music from the Sung Dynasty, and there's an incredible piece of music that's maybe from 600 AD that, of course, was found in Japan because the Japanese are good at saving stuff. Okay, to tell you the truth. And actually, this first handbook from 1425, for some reason, we assume that nothing happened when the Mongols were in control, musically. So a fair number of the pieces in that book, because this is early Ming Dynasty, may have been old. They may have been southern. So I told you already it was made of 2 boards. Typical wood is something like paulownia. The idea here actually is the top board makes the sound. So you could use something like spruce or pine. I've seen paulownia guitars, classical guitars being made these days. And then the bottom wood would be something that I don't think talp is a great idea, but we don't use it much in the U.S. We make lawn gnomes out of it. That's about it. Okay. But in China, they use it for furniture. And it is used traditionally for the bottom board. And I said the 7 strings are made originally of silk. You can get them. But if you can get them for less than $100, it's a good deal. And the harp strings, and it's actually typically hard to get. But the current going string, which is a lot louder, are a nylon metal hybrid that were borrowed from a harp. And they're much cheaper. So, the reason for the 3,000-year-old claim is in a poem in the Book of Odes, which is way back there, don't know quite when. There's a poem that's often translated as deer singing, and there's a phrase, I have elegant gifts, we play the sa, they blow in the shun, the pipe organ, we play the sa and play the chin. So there's a lot of actual use way back when, Confucius and before, of this term chin sa. And it seems to actually mean, a happy pairing. You think of the sa as a gujang. And they were apparently played together. but we don't know anything about that culture. So that's the claim. But then the real question is what the heck was the chin when Confucius was alive? And the answer is, don't know. Okay, there's some guesses. I've already told you that this is part of the ideology in painting and poems for this instrument. And it's reflected there in painting and poetry. Yeah, there's a couple. The chin shows up in a couple of ways in Chinese. There's the expression qin qi shu hua, which means chin, go, calligraphy and painting, the four arts of the gentleman. This expression apparently popped up in the Sung Dynasty. Okay? And there's usually one suspect in the Sung Dynasty for this. A certain emperor. We'll get back to that. I'll show you a picture of this. But if you're a scholar, you were expected to have some, at least you've got a go board, even if you don't play. Okay? And Dr. Young basically says the chin's first. I don't know if this is a great point or not. But if it was first, there is a rationale for that. And the rationale is that this instrument, it's better to play this than to play go. Let's put it that way. All right. There are typically some wonderful stories. Every song with the Guqin has a Chinese cultural context of some sort. We don't have, Bach staccato and fugue in D minor. It's not that. Okay. So there's this wonderful story that goes with the song my computer's going to play you, called Flowing Water. And a legendary Qin player by the name of Boya in 600 BC had a friend named Zheng Ziqi. And if Boya played high mountains on his chin, Zheng Ziqi knew what was in his heart, that he was playing high mountains. He could see the mountains, as it were, even if they weren't there. And if Boya played Flowing Water, Zheng Ziqi knew he was doing that. When Zheng Ziqi died, Boya refused to play anymore, he broke his chin. He said, there's just no use, I don't have a jurian anymore. Jurian literally means knows the sound. And it effectively knows your heart. And you can take that as either a connoisseur or a friend, one or the other. Okay? So that's, the scholar class will claim that for the chin. So what's it for? It's for self-cultivation, of course. Later I'll say a little bit about this, but a little more. It has a long tradition in Confucian ceremony and ritual, like in imperial music, except they only play open strings with 10 chin players. Okay. It's not played for an audience. It's played for the player as meditation or a listener to. It really is a chamber instrument. It doesn't have a very good sound, especially with silk strings. Keep that in mind. If it was before 1980, more or less, you had to use silk strings. After that, not so much. Okay. So, when we say the self-cultivation thing, there's two aspects to that. I'll come back to this when we say a little bit right now. One of them is the Confucian point of view, is you're playing the chin to get rid of evil tendencies in your personality. Okay. The Taoist point of view is you're playing the chin to reverberate with the universe. All right. And that's a very different point of view. We'll come back to it. But in theory, this reverberation should be healing. It should basically, heal your body of any problems. So it's double jeopardy. That's pretty good. You can heal any nasty tendencies you've got and basically cause your lumbago to go away. A few historic Qin people. Boya, I've already mentioned. Boya is legendary, although there is a gravestone in China that has his name on it. I've seen a picture of it. Whether you believe that or not is another matter. Cai Yun, who was late Han, was a famous Qin player. He had a daughter who's in some sense much more famous than he is, Cai Wenji, who was shipped off to the northern barbarians and wrote a poem about that. Yeah, she's said to be a Qin player too. Ji Kong, who I'm going to say more about, But we sort of can say from his time, it was this instrument. All right, there's some proof of that. And the proof is in a poem that he wrote, called a Chin-fu, Chin Rhapsody, according to some, which is a very long poem. And it just seems to describe the chin as it is now. Okay? So that's more or less the first proof we've got of this chin in this form. The other thing is that when he starts his poem, he basically rhapsodizes about high mountains and flowing water. That's a clue. That's a very important cultural clue about what's going on. And you may see that once or twice in Chinese landscape. Shows up. Okay. So the term in Boya's time was that Boya is the person who's said to have written the piece Gao Shan Du Shui, High Mountain Flowing Water. And later on in the Qin world, it got separated into two pieces because the way music works, at least in this instrument's case, and in other Chinese instruments, is over time it may become more and more complex. Okay. So, the other thing is Ji Kang composed a piece called Guangling Song. Now, I'm going to tell you the main cultural meme I wish to present is high mountain flowing water. Okay, that's a big idea. It shows up in poetry, it shows up in painting, it shows up in Qin. My friend Lehigh plays high mountain flowing water on the Guzheng. If he says it's 3,000 years old, you should know that what he actually means is that Boya, by legend, composed that piece. But it doesn't mean the piece he's playing is 3,000 years old. Okay? It changed a bit since then. But Ji Kang wrote this piece, Guangling Song, and I'll come back to it. Wang Lei, famous Han landscape painter, but there's a problem. What's the problem, Peter? We don't have any of his paintings. we may have some replicas from later on. We do have his poems, though. Okay? And he was a Qin player. One of the great Qin players par excellence was the last emperor of the northern Sung dynasty, Weizong. And some claim he had something in common with the Emperor Nero, which he was fiddling while China burned. He loved the Qin. He really loved it. And he loved it so much that he had a pavilion built that he called the 10,000 Qin Pavilion. I don't think he had 10,000, but he had a lot. And in fact, his favorite Qin was apparently stolen from him by the barbarian dynasty ruler who kept it. And they think it's actually been stolen out of his grave, so it might be out there somewhere in private hands. Zhu Quan, well, I don't know, if you know tea, you may actually have heard of this guy. He wrote a tea classic. But he's an early Ming prince, you know, something like the 15th son, one of those. In the Ming Dynasty, they had this rule. If you were an imperial, a prince or something like that, you got to live out in the country somewhere with guards to keep an eye on you. It didn't always work. Okay. But as a result, he spent most of his life devoted to the arts. And one of the things he did was compile all the Qin manuscripts he could find in that time. So this is this Shengqi Spirit, Mystery, Secret book, literal translation of what that is the earliest extant Qin handbook, and has 100 or so pieces of it, something like that. None of which are played now. Exactly, well, sometimes you'll see somebody like me, I've relearned them out of the book, but they weren't handed down. They were changed. The piece Flowing Water is in there, but it bears no resemblance to the one that's played now. Okay. And then there was Robert A. Gulick, Dutch diplomat, scholar, mystery writer, and Qin player. So, this is apparently a very interesting thing in art history, because there was apparently a tomb somewhere around Nanjing that had images in it of the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove. And this, of course, is one of them. It's nicely labeled as to who it is. So, I will claim it's G-Con. But all we really know is that this is pre-Tang, and probably after G-Con was dead. Okay? So they put up pictures of the 7 sages of the Wind and Road. Now there's a couple of, there's 2 things in here right off the bat that argue for antiquity, for this image. What are they? What's the difference between this and the picture of Qianlong? There's a particular piece of furniture that's missing here. No, there's no table. Why is that? What? They didn't use them yet. Yeah. If you see a Japanese samurai film and they're all sitting on the mats, what you're seeing in some sense is a warped picture of the Tang Dynasty. Okay. They didn't have tables and chairs.
Yeah.
All right. So he's playing this kneeling down. I can't do this at all. But then the other thing you can tell is actually by the trees. The trees are a giveaway that this is old. Okay. But you see it's got clay on it, right? And there's another curiosity about this, which is the mirror image. But I'm not going to try to explain that. I have a theory. Okay. So this is G-Con. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more about his life later. But you know he's an early Qin player. The other thing I want to say, though, is that he had a friend, one of the 7 sages, named Ranji. Ranji was famous for being a drunken Taoist. And he was a drunken Taoist because he didn't want to have anything to do with politics, which, given what happened to G-Con, was pretty wise. G-Con was executed by the government of the Wei Kingdom for running afoul of them politically. And Ranji basically liked to go up into the mountains just to look, to drink some rice wine and observe the scenery and, you know, get in that vibe with the scenery. And Ranji said just was to play the Qin. He was also famous for whistling, which is going to come back here in a minute. All right. So, but he was, in some sense, he's a Taoist, an early Taoist template. I mean, they're earlier than that, but given that he and G-Con were buddies, I have to include him. Okay. And also the idea of landscape is in there. So this is supposedly a painting after Wang Wei. And it's actually an early Qin painting, okay, by a Wang Shengmen. But what is it? What do you see? You see high mountains flowing water. High mountains in the background, flowing water in the foreground. Philosophically speaking, high mountains are headed that way. Okay, this is the yang direction because the sun is up there and it's young and bright. Okay, flowing water is going downhill. That's the yin direction. Okay, and this is in some sense the Qin ideal, which I'll prove a little bit later. But I wanted to get the high mountain flowing water idea. Okay, so having done that, I'll play my video. This is 6 minutes long. If you hate it, it won't last that long. All right, but this is the Qin piece, flowing water, and this is pretty common. This is me before my injury. All right, and I'm also using a Qin I made. And I have to rewind. Is that true? I guess I'm going to go backwards. That's what it sounds like if you play it back. Any questions? Yes.
How much of the sound is actually produced by your left hand rubbing on the string?
Some.
That is not just changing the
Oh, I
harmonic.
see what you mean. With the nylon metal hybrid, not very much. But with the old silk strings, there was an additional sound that you don't hear anymore. And that was the sound of your finger moving on the strings. And it's actually a raspy noise. In most modern, if you were a 20-year-old learning the chin, you wouldn't know. Probably wouldn't know about that. But people who are my age and older miss it. I mean, I have a silk-string chin. Sometimes I play it because I want to hear that raspy sound, because I think that's right. But it's another one of those things where some people will say, well, the chin needs to be modernized somehow because you can't present it to an audience. And they have a point. Yes?
I have seen people play with attachments to their fingers.
With the gujang.
With that.
Yeah. The gujang players almost always wear finger pads.
But you never use.
No,
you
we
never
don't
pluck
use-
it with your fingernails.
I have fake fingernails, but chin players always use their fingernails.
Is the skin or the nails?
It depends on whether they can. There's been a few who use their fingers because they don't do fake nails and their own nails are too crabby. And they get broken off. Or a friend of mine is basically a massage person and he can't have long fingernails, because he's a rough massage person anyway. Digging in the fingernails are too much.
Here's
Yes.
a question. Is there any thought that the long fingernail thing has anything to do with a scholar wanting to be not identified with having to work and you?
Yes, to some extent. But if they really played, they couldn't have long fingernails on the left hand. Yes.
Were you playing from memory, or is there some sort of notation?
Traditionally, you always play from memory. There is certainly notation. There's tons of notation, but you learn from the notation and you go to it if you forget. And just people don't play from the music live. It just doesn't happen. Okay? If it does, you're not paying attention. The way that this instrument actually was taught traditionally often went like this, that the student would go and learn the next section and be expected to sort of memorize it while they're there. The teacher might go over some fingering things that are in the notation because it's a symbol system. There's always one more that you don't know. But then it might turn out that they have to learn the entire piece from memory and then come back and then and only then does the teacher give them the tablature. It was a pretty harsh system.
What does the notation look like?
I'll get to that. It'll look like Chinese that no Chinese person can read. So, I've got two poetry examples. This is the more important of the two. This is written by Li Bai on hearing a monk from Shu, Sichuan, by the Qin. The monk from Shu carries a silk green chin out of the west down Mei Peak. By one brush of the strings, I hear the wind through pines of 1,000 glens. My mind swept away in the rushing river. The final notes like frost bells. While twilight settles over jade mountains, how deep the dark bottom clouds. I think this is a very cool poem. You got a landscape description, and at the same time, he's describing the monk possibly playing flowing water, or high mountain flowing water at the time. It seems to fit. And actually, there's a lot in Chinese, there's a bunch of buzzwords. Like, take a wild guess as to what this is. Any ideas? Rushing river? It's flowing water. Liu shui. Okay. So I just did that to make an English poem. The final notes like frost bells is an interesting thing because somewhere in this poem he's segueing from describing the piece to describing the landscape. Okay. Maybe he's not segueing. But traditional commentary says this final notes like frost bells is supposed to mean at that point the monk and the listener hear some temple bells off in the distance. So that's one possible explanation. Typical Chinese poem, it has at least two layers of meaning, if not three. Now, I a traditional landscape because it's by the Emperor of Wei Zong. And it really is, as far as anyone knows. And remember I said he was a chin nut. Okay, I'll prove that later. But this is typical high mountains flowing water with some clouds in the distance. There's actually a boatman down there. But if you went to the Shanghai Art Museum and walked around, you might see something like this, which is just another landscape. I think it's Ming, I'm not sure. We have high mountains, we have flowing water, we seem to have a person right here, and there's another person right here who's carrying something. It's probably a bag. Okay, so what's the deal? What's going on? The scholar is out walking the landscape to appreciate it. He's small. Nature is large. Okay? He's possibly looking for a spot to play his chin, which is what the boy is carrying. And you have to know about the chin as belonging to the scholar class to be able to explain what's in the bag. But we know, chin players know what this is, and we know what he's doing. He's circling out there looking for a good spot to play the chin. Hopefully not next to a waterfall, because if he does that, he won't be able to hear it. Okay. But this is actually, there's a name for this particular servant, kind of servant, which is a chin tool, which means a chin boy. It's his job to carry the chin. Oh, and here's another landscape with a chin player. We have two high mountains, flowing water. This is, traditionally, there's a lot of paintings like this with, this is a Ron player. Sort of, I could translate it as a Chinese guitar, a four-string guitar-like instrument. And there's somebody over here who I think is holding a tea service, just in case. This is roughing it for scholars, you know. This is the chin ideal. Now, a friend of mine, an American, lived in Asia for a long time, lived in Hong Kong for 20 years. And he asked some chin masters in China once, what should I do to improve my playing? And they gave him what he thought was a very surprising answer. The answer was, go out in nature, go find some mountains, some flowing water, sit down and play. What? Wasn't what he expected, but they were basically giving him a Taoist answer. This is in some sense about reverberating with heaven and earth. The chin is a chi organ, an energy organ in between the two. This guy's doing it just right. Okay. This is the ideal. I don't know where this comes from, but it hits the nail on the head. Now, the other meeting, we sort of saw this in a sense. Who are these two? You should know. You can tell me what their names are. No. What? No. No, it's Boya. And that's Junzi Ti. Okay? The player and the listener. And the name of this painting, which is right over there, is listening to the chin. Well, this is only, the 5,000th in the series of paintings like this that you can find. This is a modern painting. Yeah. I could claim that it was done when Moya was playing, but that's not true. Here's chin, go, calligraphy, and painting. Panels. Panels like this became popular in the Sung Dynasty and thereafter. So over here, we have a chin player. Over here, we have some guys playing go on the table. Over here, he's got the calligraphy brush and the paper out. Over here, this guy's looking at painting. He's forcing some poor student, laborer to hold it for him. This isn't a very good picture, but I have one picture. This is a reasonably good picture. You look at this, you basically say, Okay, so this got pulled out of a grave 200, 400 BC, something like that. What is it? Well, it seems to be a carved lacquer object, but it has one ridge. So it might be a proto-chip. It hasn't got the play yet. They haven't had the idea of having a flat surface so you can press the strings down. It's sort of a table harp at best. Some versions of these, basically, this is the sound box up here. This just sticks out. This is a paw, a single paw, a foot, for holding it on the ground. Back there, like there's a picture of G. Con with what he's doing. Okay. So this may be an ancestor. It's hard to say. We don't have enough evidence from 400 BC to 200 AD to be sure about how this thing actually ended up appearing.
But this is hollow.
Yes, the box is hollow in the first part. But the stem that sticks out wasn't hollow. Okay. You know, there's a famous story about some zither player becoming good. He gets invited to court and he tries to brain the king or stab him with a knife. One of the versions of that story is actually about an instrument that people get confused with the chim. And it is confusing because it disappeared in history. It didn't make it to now. And apparently what the guy really did was he made his instrument so it had a little box and was played with a mallet apparently. But he filled the box with lead and tried to brain the king. Wang Wei, famous poet at least. I'm just going to give you a literal translation of this. But there it is. Chin, not a good John. Okay. So literally it says, I'm sitting alone in secluded bamboo, play the chin, then whistle for a while. Okay. The forest is deep. People don't know. Bright moon comes, and let's say the moon shines on him, although that says mutually shines. What? I was hoping you did interject something.
I just wanted to ask him, chin is a generic word for a musical instrument.
Not then.
Not then.
Now.
So, in your mind, he had a specific instrument in mind.
Right. Well, see, in modern Mandarin, you could say gangqian. You know, that's metal chin. It's piano. That's why this had to become guqian. But in that time, they had no pianos. And we know that Wang Wei was a chin player anyway. So there's no confusion.
No.
And if they said in Tong poems, if they meant a jung, they said a jung. And it's always possible you have some complete ignoramus who doesn't know the difference.
Like me.
But we know that Du Fu knew what a peepaw was, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Bai Jui certainly knew what a peepaw was. Okay. That's, you know, like the modern term for an electronic synthesizer is an electric chin. So I had to do this slide. This is a painting of Hui Zheng playing the chin. Command performance. He's outside, obviously. There's a nice tree. He's got some very devoted listeners. Because if the emperor played, he paid attention. And he also painted it. Okay. You know, he was at least a triple threat between calligraphy, painting, and chin playing. But military strategy, not so good. So back to G. Con. I want to tell you the Guanlin song story. You know, I don't have any music to back it up. There's a couple stories associated with this piece, Guanlin song. Guanlin song is most chin pieces, I can generalize and say, they're about nature. They're about somehow being out in nature. Okay? Flowing water is an example. This piece is different because it's a good plot for a kung fu film. All right? The original story is the boy's father is making swords for the king. The king fails to pay his debts and instead has the boy's father killed. Good way to avoid your debts if you're a king. Okay. The boy is pissed. So he goes off and becomes the greatest chin player in the kingdom. And then he comes back and stabs the king to death because when he's invited, he smuggles a knife in somehow. They didn't have metal detectors. Okay. And then the sad part is that his mother comes to reclaim the body, and so she gets killed too. That's about the filial piety side of the story. But you see, it's a good revenge tale. Now later on, the story continues. How did Ji Kong learn how to play Guangdong San? Well, in theory, he composed it. Guangdong San is the longest possible chin piece. It's like 24 minutes long. I play an abbreviated version. And if you heard me play that for you once, you should be glad it's been abbreviated. It's long. So the story is that Ji Kong was out with his horse. It's evening. He needs a place to sleep, going from one place to another. There's a dark house. He goes in the house, puts out his bedroll, lays down. Then he hears chin playing coming from the next room. He goes to that room, and there's a chin, and there's a shadow playing the chin. And he says, "Please, Mr. Shadow, that's a great piece. Would you teach it to me?" And so the shadow said, "Sure." But of course the shadow disappeared at, Ji Kong's teacher disappeared at dawn. Not a big surprise. So later on, when Ji Kong is playing Guangdong San on the chin, which is that story, tells that story. Okay. Violence and anger. Okay, they say sha qi, murderous energy. All right. If you play it well enough, it's popular in your Ji Kong. These entities right here are ghosts. This is in the Cleveland Art Museum. And this ghost here is pulling this ghost out of the ground. Apparently needed a leg up. But that's the story of Guangdong San. And then because of the murderous energy aspect of it, it appeared in Red Cliff. They took some of the music, recomposed it, and so you end up seeing Zhuge Liang and Zhou Yu playing the two chin together in combination, in theory. Okay. So if you've seen Red Cliff, you've seen a chin scene. But it's not the normal chin music. It's extraordinary music. All right. So the Qin Dao, the way of the Qin, we say that the Qin is a Taoist instrument from the point of view of Nangshan, nurturing the body. Okay? Literally, if you take this, I don't know, you could basically say what this really means is when you play the Qin, you want to focus on what you're doing and forget your stress. All right? You should become the Qi organ, be in contact with heaven and earth. You're in the middle playing. So the energy comes through you, you reverberate with the Qin, with heaven and earth. And this should help you become more centered and forget, deal with the problems of stress. There's a Qin piece called Olu Wang Ji, which is translated as, it's hard to translate. Wang Ji is an old Taoist phrase, literally means forget the mechanism, forget the machine. Okay? And it's basically the title is Seagulls Forgetting the Machine. In other words, somebody rode out in the harbor in a boat, and the seagulls would land on his head, maybe poop on his head, land on his arms. They thought he had no dangerous thoughts. He wasn't going to wring the seagull's neck. Okay, it wasn't going to happen. It's a good Taoist state that they can trust you. The animals can trust you. So we play the Qin in order to forget the scheming mind. Now this is actually why Go is different. Go is all about cultivating the scheming mind. The more scheming you are, the better. Okay. There's a Confucian aspect. There's an ancient Qin that's in Japan, and it's got all this inlay, and it has a quote in the back from a Han Dynasty poet. There are arguments about how old it is, but never mind. It has this poem on it that basically sort of starts off by saying, we play the Qin in Qinja Jinya. We play the Qin in order to suppress licentious thoughts, to get rid of evil. That's the Confucian point of view. So, another way to put that because, you basically are cultivating yourself and practicing the correct rituals in order to be a human being, which is a Confucian saying, which I sort of translated with Nobel. Okay? But that's that idea. From the Confucian point of view, you play the chin to learn how to control yourself. It's a very Confucian idea. Okay. A little mythology. A couple things to say. The top of the chin is round, like heaven is round. The bottom is square, like the earth. It's flat, at least. Okay. And that's sort of, the three poles in traditional Chinese thinking of heaven, earth, and the human being in the middle, basically. The human being in the middle is the player. That's why I say this is a chi organ, energy level. All right, from that point of view. The rest of this, except the last part is interesting, the rest of this is just traditional mythology. Because if we say the chin is 36.5 inches long, therefore it's all for all the days of the year, you can say, what inch scheme was that? This is traditional mythology, don't hold me to it. There were originally 5 strings, quote unquote, okay? Because there's 5 notes in the scale, do, re, mi, so, la. And some sage emperors decided that wasn't enough and threw in 2 more strings. We don't know, that's just a story. That's why there's 7 strings. There are 13 play, well that's a problem. So the way they fixed that was they said there's 12 months plus 1 for the leap year. And then a really cool idea is that, and there's actually some science to this, is the top should be made, I mentioned Tsai-Yun before, the top should be made from a tree, ideally on a mountain. You get it on the sun side, the south side in our case. Okay? And it's even better if that tree's been struck by lightning. Why? Because that means the top is really, really, really a reservoir of yang energy. The top is yang, the bottom is yin. Okay? So, and then we put lacquer on it and it becomes a lacquer object that's valuable. Right? You can imagine how much a tongqin would be valuable. So that's curious. I had to get that in.
Did they use inches in China?
What?
Did they use inches as measurement in China?
No, they use millimeters these days. But in all of the dynasties before, they had an inch. It just varied. The nasty question here is, what inch are you talking about? That's best left unsaid. Well, you listen to a long, complex chin piece. I can point out that the music had 3 parts. It had open strings, used rather well in the case of the composition of that piece. It had a ton of harmonics. They end as an example, but there were harmonic passages in there. And it had press strings, all of that sliding up and down as an example of that. The thing is, though, chin music, each individual sound has its own characteristics. And depending on what you're doing with the left hand and what you're doing with the right hand, there are different touches, so the results may be different. The music itself is, it's melodic, it's a pile of musical sentences. All right. And typically with the chin, there's actually an added thing, which is that because the same tone can be found in so many places, a simple example is there'll be a contrast of an open string and a pressed string playing the same note, but with different tone colors. You're supposed to be able to appreciate that. Yeah, to learn to appreciate that. So tone color is important. But it's Chinese music. So melody is very, very strong consideration. I'm going to say that. I mentioned these already too. So what time am I supposed to be done?
About 11.
Okay. I think we can do that. All right. One little thing I want to say is traditional chin is not loud. If you can't hear it, You should be able to imagine it. So, there are many, many traditional handbooks. John Thompson, my friend I mentioned before, says there's 170 surviving Chin handbooks. There's over 600 melodies in those 100 plus handbooks. Less than 10% are actually played at this time. Some people are trying to reconstruct some of the older melodies, and they keep coming back. And there's just examples: Shenqi Mipu from 1425, Wuji Jai Xinpu, early Qin, Qin Xue Ruman, which actually is still used to some extent, the Qin study primer. And that book I translated, actually, that I gave the English title of Bargaining with Antiquity, it's the non-music parts of this book, of the Qin Xue Ruman. Plus it includes a chapter on how to make Qin. Modern handbooks, here's a whole bunch of them. This is an example of sort of a modern and traditional handbook. Actually, it has some so-called jempu in the back, so you actually know what the rhythm is. This is called the Mian Qin Handbook. It was published in 1931. This is the second edition version from Taiwan. Third edition, actually. Who was it who asked about the music? Here is some. All right. This is out of the Mian Handbook. First line of a piece called Autumn Wind. So the way this works is each one of these is a composite glyph. So this is saying the top half says what to do with the left hand. So basically thumb on Hui 9, plays string 6 with the Tiao stroke, which is like that. And there's a little bitty guy above the 6 that says slide into it. So that's what it was. That's that note.
Oh, boy.
Now, in 600 AD, with the piece that was found in Japan in the 1800s, they didn't do it that way. They wrote it out in classical Chinese. So they would say, take your left hand, your thumb, put it at the ninth way, take your right hand, your index finger, do this. So there was a sentence for every one of those. And what happened was, somewhere between the Tang and the Sung, since calligraphy, stuff had been going on forever up to that point, some genius said, this sucks. I'm going to come up with a simplified character composite way to do the Qin. So when you read Shenqi Mipu, which is the first text in the handbook, you basically have this form. It's a little different, but it's still the same thing. The funny thing is that it actually has sort of two font sizes. The big one's telling you what to do with the finger, and the smaller thing is sort of telling you what should be happening after that stroke, or an alteration of that particular stroke. It's sort of commentary on how it's to be played.
What is 26 movement one means?
Which one?
The one you just pointed.
Sounds
26.
Oh, the small characters in the middle.
No, it's not 20. It's san, means open. It means string 6 is open, it's not pressed. And
Female.
it isn't female, it's wu. You need to add the codes up. These are simplified characters from the Sung Dynasty.
Is there a time element?
Good question. The answer is traditionally no. You're supposed to, you learn it from your teacher, you better not forget it. And there's a thing informally called dapu, which is literally hitting the tablature, sort of hitting the books, where you take a piece where you don't know you take the tablature where you don't know the tempo and reconstruct it. Now I've done that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you can't figure it out musically. Modern Qin has a tendency to look like this because of the question you just asked, which was brilliant. Okay. Now we've got the tempo. So it it may appear with either the Chinese Jianpu simplified pu system, which is do, re, mi, so, la, solfege, or like so. And this actually has the words because this is a sung poem at the bottom. But you can see tempo and notes if you care, but chin players actually don't usually care. Sometimes they do. Sometimes some players will sing it. You know, but they like to have, you know, if I did that, it's nice to have the Chinese version. And then the chinpu on the second line. And then a traditional hand, well, okay, so here's a complete piece. Okay. And there's the poem, the Autumn Wind poem, the Chin tablature. Okay. And what's interesting about this is these are just like in classical Chinese. If you've got big dots, that's the end of the musical sentence. Okay. And these are actually, this is something unique to this particular Chin handbook. These are marking quarter tones. They figured that if you knew what the quarter tones was, it was close enough.
This one has lyrics, right?
What?
This one has lyrics.
Yes.
Accompanied with music.
There are some shorter pieces have lyrics. In fact, that's what I may do for you. We'll see if I've got enough guts. Play a really simple piece. Traditional handbook. This is basically a technique called law, playing all three strings, two strings at once, 3 fingers out like so. It's supposed to be like the tail of a fish. That's what this is saying. Okay. This is from the Ming Dynasty, actually. The slow chord, which is just 2 strings at once, like so. What's your model?
Dragon.
Yeah, dragon fingers. All right, so that's a nice model. These aren't necessarily easy to get, but they republished Robert Van Gulik's The Lore of the Lute, which is the lore of the Chin, in Thailand recently, in Bangkok. It's been for sale on Amazon. The first edition is a rare book, and I hope you know what that means. Also, he translated Jikong Shinfu poem, which as far as I know has been translated twice. It's also in the literary selections Wenchuan that David Connectus at UW translated. So I've never seen the translation, but I know that Reed's got it. Okay. And then Fred Lieberman, there's a number of PhD theses actually in the US, and Fred Lieberman's a noted musicologist, worked with the Grateful Dead way back then. And his PhD thesis was taking the man Chinpu and translating it, talking about the pieces, talking about the music, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And there's a ton of stuff. On the web, go to John's website, www.silkchin.com. Remember, chin is Q-I-N. Okay. He's got a ton of, more than anyone can stand in English. And he always says this wonderful thing like, didn't you read that on my website? And I said, no. You keep changing it. No, he's got 5 tons of information. You just go to YouTube and type in Gu Chin in English or Gu Chin in Mandarin. Okay, you can do that in China too on Youku or Tudo. And you'll get Chin videos, usually. Never know, but most of them will. And I have a channel of me that's on YouTube that's Lao Chinyo, L-A-O-Q-I-N-Y-O-U. And I have a partial translation of what I did for a book that's on PSU site. So that's for more information. Any questions about that? No? Nice boatman, but we're going to ignore him. Well, I guess I'm going to try to play a piece. Did I leave anything out, Dennis?
No.
Too much? That's great. Let's just try a little experiment. If you're in the back row. Can you hear that?
Well,
Should it be Shenlong Cao or Yangguan San? Do you have it?
也换3 D。
Okay, I won't sing. Because you know how I sing.
So you're turning pegs that tune the strings, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm changing the mode, quote unquote. If you know music theory, this piece is actually in Dorian mode. In Chinese, we would say it's in Shang mode. song of Way City. In Way City, morning rain settles like dust. While you're in, new color in green willows, have another cup of wine. Out west or down past, there won't be any old friends. So the title of the Chin Beats is Young Wild